Welcome to our new series, Talkative Strangers, in which we'll bring guests from all around the world and get to learn from them. Today we have with us Kade Johnson. Thank you so much for coming and being our first guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
So, I like to talk about Socrates and with respects to, yeah. Okay.
Yes, continue.
Continue. Okay. Yeah. With respects to the channel's name, you guys ostensibly don't know what you're doing, which is an interesting position to take because Socrates developed this idea that that one should perhaps, or rather, he argued in defense of his life that he knew nothing and was the wisest among the Greeks because of this fact. And so there's a whole methodology of claiming to not know and then standing in a position to learn because you don't know. And if you notice, if you know everything, then you don't stand in a position to learn anything, right? So essentially, he kind of throws this one-liner in the face of like the Athenians who are putting him on trial for his life, for spreading philosophy and kind of disregarding the gods at the time, right. And so he
basically the idea of self-mastery, that a person, there is no god, there is a person only who can master a skill or himself and can achieve what he wants in life.
It's very more like a Nietzschean or like take on some Socratic notions. Like, because I don't know if you could necessarily say that Socrates was like not like religious in any particular way. You might say that he disregarded a lot of the traditions at the time that involved religion, and supplanted them with his logical process, his logical mode of inquiry. And so, some might say that that's, against the religions of the time, and some might, beg to differ. It's kind of up for grabs, I think. But Christianity does take a lot of Socratic ideas and runs with them.
Yes, exactly.
They like that he has a immaterial world of forms, that he alleges to exist beyond the material reality that we live in. And that jives really well with like at least Christian doctrine. And, so like the supposition that Socrates wasn't religious was kind of weird because like seemingly he thought that something was more important than religion and that he was doing that thing, which was philosophy.
Yes, the person itself is also important than religion.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting conversation, but Nietzsche comes in and kind of says like I don't even really like the Socrates guy because he seems to pave the way for that like whole religious architecture that follows in the Western world. To some extent, he disagrees with, Nietzsche disagrees with that attitude, right? Although some of the more interesting aspects of philosophy, if you ask me, arise from like pre-Socratic philosophy and how pre-Socratic philosophy shapes the way we think about our material realities around us. Like, for instance, you've got like Heraclitus, who thinks that everything is made of fire. And this can be like interpreted in kind of like a loose way, but exactly. In essence, he's the first guy who says you can never step in the same river twice, which sort of gives you an idea about how to view reality in a kind of fluxional, ever-changing perspective. Whereas someone like Parmenides, he like asks the question, are things one or many? And he like concludes that things are one because if they were many, then they wouldn't interact with each other. So everything must be on some level fundamentally the same. And so that's really interesting to me because it paints a picture of the universe as something static, something immobile, right?
Okay.
And what's interesting about the fact that people have really followed this Parmenidean view throughout history is that we associate truth and meaning with things that are static in nature rather than fluxional or changing.
For example, that you can relate to this idea.
Oh yeah, like for instance, when you like look at your phone, right?
Yes. Right.
You can think of it as the phone because people have always told you that it's a phone.
Yes,
but you can also think of it as like a projectile. You can throw it. You can toss it around.
Yes, exactly.
It has different.
But it
yeah.
it will still remain the phone actually.
Yeah.
But if you throw it, it doesn't actually change its position, or it will change.
It doesn't change what its being is. It's like ontology.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it does change the way you apprehend, like kind of perspectivize it as like a static object, right?
But it's the basically sharing of the reality of telling the object as the same that you are perceiving it.
Right. So our associations with the object are projections of our conscious, ever-changing minds. And so it's kind of interesting, like when you look at like how we've construed truth for a long time in the history of philosophy as something that's static and unchanging, when in fact, sometimes you have to wonder, like when, for instance, you have a whole diversity of stuff out there. There's like all sorts of stuff, and it's allegedly created or combined, like out of combinations of stuff that's self-similar, right? So there has to be like a kind of, and this is Derridean in its nature, the argument anyway, that there must be something causing everything to differentiate, to change, and become.
There must be a cause for everything that is being occurred in our reality.
Right. Okay. So like, what's the cause of differentiation in the matter that is allegedly homogeneous is a kind of a cool question. And like some area that's kind
there
of
must be something cause of every matter or everything that is being formed here.
Yeah.
But I mean, science also proves these arguments in very fundamental sense. That you can also say.
I mean, I do tend to gravitate towards science a lot. And a lot of the pre-Socratic thought is proto-scientific, if not scientific, and it's very like
they are proto, but they are not proved in some sense, but they synchronize with basic scientific ideas also.
Yeah, I mean, the process of science is really interesting. I think it's cool that you brought it up, because science is, at least my understanding, science has a basis in falsification, which means that you can say what you want and people can try and disprove you. And the scientific apparatus is always trying to disprove previous articulations about how reality works. And so the only things that become like laws of science are the only things that people haven't been able to prove wrong. Statements that like you can't figure out why, or any circumstance under which the rules would go differently, right? For those objects. So like the first law of thermodynamics or the second law of thermodynamics, like, energy cannot be created or destroyed is one of those.
Destroyed, yes. Some of the conservation of laws also.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's
this is yes.
No, go on. Shrey, go on.
Okay.
No.
Yes. Okay.
You were saying something that we are actually.
Oh yeah, it's interesting to me that some homogeneous stuff would recombine and create the diversity that we see out there without having something innately within the homogeneous thing, the static whatever that Parmenides thought up, that is actually doing like a differentiating pass. It's like some proto like almost thaumaturgical, like before like or ontological, right? Like entity, which is causing things to divide and separate into the varieties of things that they are.
Right. So overall, that was the idea behind the Socrates.
So Socrates is just kind of like an interesting gateway to like thinking about like how to proceed methodologically with, some kind of inquiry, right? So if I were to like, adopt a Socratic method, I might say that I don't really know what you guys think, and I would like to know your opinions about varieties of things, right? And that, and so if I kind of project that mode outwards, I guess it kind of comes off like a question, like, what do you guys think about all that? Right?
Regarding which, the Socrates part.
Sure.
I think if we talk about Socrates was a bit of, you can call it as atheist, who was not much religious in some sense. And he pushed or basically tell the people to follow themselves, listen to their heart or whatever the work is.
Right.
And then grow in that field.
There is that
because there was so much clutter in religion at that point of time. So Socrates was quite different from that I think of him.
I think you're right. He definitely took a different path than like the one of like praising Zeus or praising Hera or whatever it was in ancient Greece at the time that you would direct your efforts towards. He wanted to know why people believed what they believed. And what is a justification for your belief and what counts as a justified true belief. As opposed to like one that you kind of just have latently from maybe the way society brought you up. He encourages another interesting thing I find in Socrates that I find in a lot of other philosophers involves this impetus, this desire to escape the boundaries dictated by the society within which one operates. In the common way of saying that, it's like thinking outside the box, right? That's like the original way of talking about thinking outside the box is to say like, I know that I know nothing, or to say that like, I can like remove myself from all of society's trappings and distance myself far enough away so I can create a perspective about that and different, right? And take my own stance, take my own position, right? And have it genuinely be one's own. And I think like for instance, Rene Descartes does this when he says, "I think, therefore I am," because the way he gets to that conclusion is he basically states, "I'm going to doubt everything that I can possibly doubt in existence." And out of that doubt, he came to one conclusion, is that he thought, therefore he is. And so this process of doubting is not unlike this this modality of not knowing or trying to think outside the box, if you will. It's all kind of like this recurrent theme.
So it was basically given by Rene Descartes at some point of time, around Renaissance period.
Yeah, in the 1700s, Rene Descartes sort of articulated that.
Cogito ergo sum was the term that he used at that point of time, which means that I think, therefore I am.
Right. So his move is not dissimilar from Socrates' move that Socrates made so long ago. And a lot of different philosophers kind of reiterate this tension of like, what does it mean to have a genuine experience with truth for oneself, and what factors make the thing that you think adequately true in your estimation, right? So from a variety of perspectives, I mean, like for instance, Wittgenstein, right? He goes kind of to himself like, I think the exact quote is, of that which we can speak clearly, and of that which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. right? And I think that's another iteration of,
yes, in some sense,
another reiteration of this boundary between the known and the unknown, and what resides beyond the known in the unknown is the desire quotient, right? So it's a kind of interesting, like, metaphysical kind of presupposition about reality, that it's divided into the known and the unknown, and that we should articulate that we do not know in order to learn more, right? To come full circle back around to that.
Yes, exactly. And get into the loop of knowing something and then
acknowledge that you still have much more to learn after you feel as though you know, because in the end, you know that you know nothing, right?
Yes, that's exactly. That's the whole point. Socrates.
Socrates. Yeah. I think it's pretty fascinating.
And I want to draw one argument that Nietzsche gave of the God is dead. So why did he discarded all the religion at that point of time? What was his argument related?
So I think,
if you can share with us.
I think, like, Nietzsche discarded religion in a lot of ways because he was noticing that the religious mode of existence was doing violence to some kind of innate sense of, like, life thriving as it might in a natural circumstance.
Can you give an example for that?
Yeah. So, like,
how
for instance,
religious being that.
For instance, like, religion says, someone, shouldn't have premarital sex, or shouldn't be gay, or shouldn't be a lot of different things, or should be a lot of different ways. He's saying that this is an oppressive regime of shoulds and should nots, of moral hierarchy, according to which.
But that's where the society works also. If there must be some moral
there must be some moral.
There.
Well, and some people accuse him of having not the
you
best.
You cannot discard it.
Yeah. I mean, he just tends to situate, like, moral value in, like, some kind of notion about, like, life thriving in nature, as opposed to something like what he construes to be a constructed, humanly, like, a constructed kind of human rigid boundaries based on what he believes to be some kind of myth that has arisen from years of worshiping deity, right?
So he was against the worshipping part.
Well, I mean, he was against the current state of the Catholic Church, really, and more generally against religions and systems of thought that rely on authority, right? Because he essentially doesn't want anyone to take anything at face value, which is a very common philosophical tendency, is to inquire as to whether the information is it correct or is it incorrect. And
this is philosophy all about it.
Yeah, and religion always tells you, like, this is what it is, and don't think outside the box, right? So he was really in opposition to that kind of concept. And I mean, and there's varieties of like examples where he, like, rails against Socrates. He doesn't like that Socrates martyred himself, he for justice when he was put to death. He doesn't like that because it seems against Socrates' best interests, unless Socrates was trying to do something a little bit kind of underhanded and manipulative towards the Athenians by putting himself in this position to die, right? Which arguably he did. Xenophon likes to argue, according to that propensity, that Socrates, like, actually tried to get himself killed as to be a martyr for justice, whereas Plato has a very much more understanding Socrates kind of perspective that sort of situates his not knowing as a methodological tool, as I previously described.
Yes, exactly.
So Nietzsche kind of aligns with the Xenophon perspective, whereas maybe Plato aligns more closely with like Descartes or Wittgenstein, as previously discussed. Right. In a loose way. You know, I can make the argument, and I have, but someone might like reasonably disagree.
So that was, yes, Aryan, please proceed.
Oh yeah.
And what are your beliefs regarding God? I mean, what do you mean with the term God? And do you believe in God?
Oh yeah, like I mean, it depends on like how you define your terms, right? Like I like kind of a Spinozistic view of God. Like Spinoza is a philosopher as well, and he says that like God is all of nature, like everything, right? And so I kind of like this perspective on God because it sort of aligns with the way I look at reality scientifically. But I'm not a big fan of like the bearded man in the sky vision of deity. It seems kind of wacky to me, right?
Yes.
If you want to define your terms, like maybe God is energy, or maybe God is life, or whatever. Like if you
God is the creator, also we can tell him that also.
Right. So if you define your terms adequately, I can definitely respond to that. You know, but I do often feel that, and this might be a little Nietzschean of me, that when people use the word God, it's an empty placeholder for something that they haven't defined, like adequately defined, so as to know what they're even saying.
That's the basic concept of God.
Yeah, that's like a big concern. And some people even like allege that you can't know anything about God. And so that's like a whole like negative theological approach. And there's like a whole discourses that operate like in that mental zone of like knowing that something is unknowable, or knowing that things are unknowable, is kind of
relating that to God.
Yeah, it's kind of paradoxical in a way, but like also there's some validity to it, perhaps. It's interesting nevertheless, right? Yeah, it's like Derrida talks about that in like On the Name. He writes about a negative theology. It's kind of interesting in that particular work. But yeah, do you have any questions?
Yes. So if we talk about the context that you draw of Nietzsche, so according to you, the society, there must be rules and morals attributed by religion, or people should make their own morals and principles. So that would not be some chaotic nature that Nietzsche opposed actually. So what's the reason behind that?
Right. So I kind of think that like there's a paradox that arises from the observation that morality is an absolute imposition, and the notion of an inherent freedom in the subject. So like in order for a moral to function, someone needs to will its enforcement, right? So like there's a structural relationship between holding a belief and believing that some other agent should hold the same belief and act according to it. So in a certain way, you've got kind of like the freedom of subjects over here, and like sort of moral hierarchies over here. And Nietzsche is really rather skeptical of moral hierarchies, like institutions of religion that tell you universally what is right. So he's kind of against like Kantian deontology, and he's even against like maybe a utilitarian greatest happiness for the greatest number, right?
Yes, utilitarian principle.
Yeah, so insofar as he differs, I would say that he differs on grounds that if you say that morals are relative, I think the moral hierarchy dissolves. It crumbles, because no one could say, you know, you should do this, or someone should do something, right? That's the structure of like a Kantian moral framework. So like, for instance, if I were to say, like, let me see, how shall I put this? like instead of taking the side of a moral hierarchy by rejecting relativism, one could elect to reject the moral hierarchy and affirm the inherent freedom of the subject. But like this sort of obviates like the need for morality and supplants some sort of system of valuation that's very personal in nature, right?
Right.
And so for Nietzsche, he thinks something like thriving or the propensities of life to express themselves is kind of that highest good, right? And so, you know, he wants you to come to similar but not the same conclusions as he does in certain respects with regards to like, you know, what is the driving force of like vitality in existence? He's kind of asking that question, right? And so his moral system is sort of situated around like what brings about the most like life, right?
Right.
And so when you get like back to like Kantian shoulds and should nots, they start to sound a little weird. Like you should not, you know, stay awake past 10:30, right? Sounds weird to a Nietzschean who is like, well, there's plenty of reasons why I should maybe from my individualistic perspective do what I wish to do, which is stay up past 10, right?
You cannot. You have some certain amount of boundaries in which you have to act also.
Right. So
you
like
have some of limitations.
Yeah. So like Nietzschean, like I don't know, I consider it rather amoral, but there is some sort of driving metaphysical force that he seems to be ascribing to and placing value upon. And so things that agree with this sort of universal force, which is life, go to, you know, this is where you can critique him. Like they go to the good category, and then things that don't do that go to the bad category, where he's even written a book called Beyond Good and Evil, where he's trying to situate himself outside of those ideas.
Morals that society gives us, basically.
Yeah. So even though he says like I don't have like a moral, like shouldn't sort of perspective going on, he's still this is the criticism. He's still aspiring to this life thing, right? That seems to be universal and prevalent. And so when we have to acknowledge that Nietzsche may have like kind of, I don't know, like may have contradicted himself in some respects. He also says that he has his contradictions and sort of presupposes like kind of this position on truth that sort of places it in disregard. Like hitherto in a lot of Christian theology, like truth is out there in God, and God shines the light of truth like into the being of things. This is the way that like, you know, people thought about how truth worked, that we access the truth that was disseminated by divinity in the thing itself. And he really wants to say that like, no, we give the thing meaning, and that meaning stems from our life force. And so when we like ascribe valuation to things like that, like there's a different way of like acknowledging how something might contribute to a value judgment than like when someone says you ought to do this or ought to do that, or more people will be happy if you do this or that, right? Exactly. You know, yeah. So the mode of analysis differs, I suppose. Not to say that you couldn't maybe come to some of the same conclusions. Oftentimes, though, different, you know, a lot of different conclusions do get reached from like a Nietzschean perspective versus like a Kantian perspective. And a lot of like, you know, surprisingly enough, a lot of like atheist moralists exist. They say things like, you know, they have like a lot of them, at least that I know personally, have like, you know, vegan bents, because they don't agree with the religious notion of dominion over the world, right?
Okay.
Kind of an interesting like angle to take. They think that like we should be more respectful of our environments and such and the like. For instance.
Yes. So that was the basic notion behind Nietzsche that he explained in his works.
That's one of many things Nietzsche has said, and I mean, I can allude to like he talks about the reevaluation of all values, and I think that idea is very centric to this propensity for us to like when we reevaluate values, that's the same thing as what we've been talking about this whole time with like knowing that you know nothing or thinking therefore you are, you know, all of these examples of kind of philosophical thinking in general. So
yes, exactly. So that was the point behind the Nietzsche. So it was. So that's it. I think that was a great session from yours, and we. So thank
sounds
you so
great.
much for
Thanks
coming.
for having me on.
Thank you so much for coming.